Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Alliance's Facebook Live event about the importance of caregiver self-care. I am so excited that you're joining us this evening. We've got a great presentation for you. We hope that it's informative and interactive, and you come away with some really great information as well as support. So my name is Danielle Peterson. I am an oncology social worker, and I've been working with families facing cancer for over 6 years and have always been just very much intrigued and inspired by caregivers who dedicate so much of themselves to helping their loved ones through cancer. I'm joined tonight by two absolute rock star caregivers, Lindsay and Brian, and they're going to introduce themselves to you here shortly. I've also had the honor of being a patient navigator with the Colorectal Cancer Alliance before I started teaching social work full time. And so I just want to thank the Alliance for giving us the opportunity tonight to have this really important conversation together. And I'm excited to share with you some resources that the Alliance offers to caregivers all across the nation. So that's a little bit about me. Lindsay, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your story and why this topic of caregiver self-care is so important to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay, and I am a caregiver to my husband. He was diagnosed at 32 with stage 3B rectal cancer. This was when our son was only 8 months old, and we were living in Columbus. He was diagnosed back in December of 2018 after he noticed he had some blood in his stool. He then went and talked to his father, who is a retired OBGYN. So his father was like, well, that doesn't sound, correct. So he told him he needed to see his primary care physician, who then, after he saw them, recommended that he get a colonoscopy, which initially they thought was just some internal hemorrhoids because there's a lot of family history with internal hemorrhoids in his family. So cancer obviously was never a thought that crossed our mind, which was causing the bleeding. But after his colonoscopy, the gastrointestinal doctor pulled me into a consultation room, and I knew from there that something was not right. And when he told me that Paul had cancer and confirmed it without even getting the biopsy back, it was pretty much like a punch in the gut to me. So when he, so then after the initial scans, they found out that he had a donut-shaped tumor in his rectum, lower rectum, as well as a really small 4-millimeter spot in his lungs that the oncologist really wasn't too concerned about. So they started him as a T3 as far as the tumor size and staged him as 3 since the spot in his lung, they couldn't confirm either way if it was cancer or not. So we decided to go on the Xeloda plan instead of doing the 48-hour pump. We thought that would work better for Paul, but in his case, he unfortunately ended up having heart failure, which caused us to be in and out of the hospital for 4 days. And then they decided to do what's called a bolus pump, which is a shot that was between 3 to 5 minutes, plus the oxyl platinum. And we had to do those in the hospital the first few times just to make sure that his heart was tolerating that okay instead of every day with the pills. So then after that, he completed 2 full cycles with the bolus shot and the oxyl platinum, and that ended about May. And they decided to do short course radiation on the rectal tumor. And shortly after that, in the beginning of July of 2019, he had his resection surgery, which went well, and he had a temporary ileostomy. And then in August of 2019, he went in for his scans after post-surgery, and that's when they found about 10 small, under 4-millimeter spots in his lungs that were in actually all chambers of his lungs. So our doctor wasn't too concerned at the time about it. We live in Ohio, so there's a lot of like fungus that grows in Ohio. So he's like, he could be that, you know, it could be metastasis, but we just can't biopsy it and know for sure that it's cancer. So we're just going to do some cleanup chemo and see like what happens. So after we did the cleanup chemo, September to October, we did more scans and his CEA was starting to slowly rise. So there was suspicion that it actually was metastasized to his lungs. And then around Thanksgiving of last year, that's when he had his reversal done. And he's had some complications with that as far as frequency and urgency, especially in the evenings, which has been kind of tough because we feel like he loses all of his evenings in the bathroom. And so finally, in May of this year, one of the spots got big enough to biopsy. So that's when we discovered that it was indeed more cancer in his lungs. And our oncologist in Columbus pretty much told us that he had like 3 years to live. And we, as a family, just thought that just can't be possible. He's only 34 at the time, like he's otherwise healthy. So we started reaching out to other places, and we were very lucky to get in MD Anderson during the COVID, because I know a lot of people were having trouble getting in there, and they had a much more positive outlook and said we needed to start a new chemo regimen, which was full fury with the irinotecan. And actually, we're here in Houston now. We're about to get scans tomorrow, so praying that everything goes well. And the reason I wanted to do this Facebook Live event is just to bring, you know, more awareness to caregivers, especially people who are young like me, and just like tell you guys that you're not alone in all this, and you're just as important, you know, as the person you're caring for. And I know some days are good and some days are bad, and most days are really bad, but there are like ways that we can help ourselves out on those really bad days. And I honestly never thought that at 32 now, I would be in this position of being a young caregiver for my husband, who didn't really show hardly any signs of having cancer and doesn't show any signs still of having cancer. So it has been hard, but if like I can help like anyone, like give some good advice on how I have coped with like this tough time, that, you know, I hope that, you know, me being able to be involved in this conversation and knowing that I could potentially help someone just brings me some joy in this dark time.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, for sharing your story so openly and honestly. I know that there's going to be a lot of viewers who understand all those big words that you just said and all those treatment curveballs that you talked about, and complications. They're going to get that. They're going to shake their head knowingly. And so thank you again for being willing to be here tonight. Brian, tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. This is Brian Ruddle. My wife, Jennifer, was diagnosed with stage 4 rectal cancer about 3 years ago at the age of 41. Sort of similar to Lindsay's husband, in that it was low in the rectum, and then it had already traveled to her lungs by the time they found it. We'd been traveling for a while, and we got home and she thought that she was just, you know, tired from the traveling. Started out as flu symptoms, cold symptoms. We called Teledoc like you normally do. We went to urgent care. It wasn't getting any better, so we went to our primary care doctor. They did a blood test and found that she had about half the blood in her body that you're supposed to, about 7. Her hemoglobin was about 7. So they sent us to the ER. They did a blood transfusion and then started looking to see where the blood may be going. You know, why was she missing so much blood? And so they did an MRI, and they found a mass. They saw the mass in the rectum and then the spots in the lungs. So they scheduled her for, we stayed overnight, obviously, in the hospital. They scheduled her for a colonoscopy in the morning. They found the mass, and it was like a donut, like Lindsay said, but it had grown to the point where it had sort of cut off access to about 95% of her rectum. So they scheduled her for an emergency colonoscopy. because at that point she'd been constipated for a while and wasn't able to function properly. So we did that. They added the colonoscopy, or they added the sorry, I'm forgetting the word, the ostomy, and we were in the hospital for about 16 days. We went home. We called Cancer Treatment Centers of America. Went out there. The plan that they devised was a mixture of chemo and radiation to the main tumor. So we started on the I guess it was Capox, a couple IV infusions of Capox, and she was not tolerating that at all. So we did a little bit more research, found out that Xeloda came in a pill form. So we went on that. So we couldn't do the hard chemo, but she's actually still on the Xeloda pills 3 years later. And then we met with a naturopathic oncologist and added supplements because she couldn't do the heavy chemo. That actually worked really well. Within about 6 months, the main tumor had shrunk to the point where they could go in and remove it. So they did that. They removed it. They took out the colostomy and they added an ileostomy. And then about 8 weeks after that, they were able to go in and reverse the ileostomy. And so she's fully functional again, although of course it's never quite the same, but we'll take it, you know. The next thing we did was we focused on the lungs. And of course we had some options there. There are about 6 spots in both sides in various areas, so it wasn't confined to just one area that you could just sort of go in and remove with surgery. So we decided to go through radiation, which we did. 25 rounds of radiation to the lungs. And we thought for a short period of time that it was successful, but it did not kill them. It delayed them and slowed them down. So we had some additional discussions and decided on doing a different form or different application of radiation again. We did that about 8 weeks ago, and that style of radiation seems to have really been effective. Her CEA level has gone from 27 down to 8 in the last 8 weeks. We hope that it'll continue going down, and that maybe by the end of the year, if everything continues, we can get her off the chemo finally, and maybe she'll be, you know, we hope that she'll be in remission. But that's kind of our story. The reason I'm doing this is, you know, I don't think anything in life prepares you for this. You know, being a caregiver for someone with cancer, especially, you know, potentially terminal cancer, is life-changing. You know, and you just kind of fumble your way through it. You try to figure it out. There's not a lot of, if you don't know the resources are out there, it's trial and error, you know, and trying to figure out how are you going to keep your life going and everything, you know, everything going that you need to work and being a caregiver in the household and everything else that you have to do. So if I can impart some advice or, you know, tell some folks what worked for me and that helps them, that's great. And I want to be able to do that.
And thank you very much again for being honest and open. And even if we just stopped right now, I think that our listeners would get a lot from just knowing that they're not alone. And even, you know, anyone who's listening tonight, even if your story isn't exactly like Brian or Lindsay's, we believe that you're going to come away with some good tips, you know, for taking care of yourself and trying to carve out time to refresh and recharge as needed, because this is like a marathon, you know, not really like a sprint as a caregiver. Before I move on, we have an important question from the audience, and it's for Brian. The audience member wanted to know if you could repeat the type of scan that was used on your wife's lungs.
I believe it was an MRI first.
Okay.
That showed the mass in her rectum and then the spots in her lungs.
Okay. Thank you for.
Yeah. They confirmed it with a biopsy.
Okay. which isn't always possible with the lung. So I'm glad that she had a chance to also have a biopsy. It's great. So thank you for clarifying.
Sure.
So some statistics around caregiving to set the stage. In 2016, the National Alliance of Caregiving did a survey on caregivers, and not just any caregivers, but caregivers who are doing this role for a loved one with cancer specifically. And they got about 100 people to fill out their survey. And I thought that they found some important findings that I wanted to share with you tonight. The first being that the average number of hours a week spent in caregiving duties was 33. For most people, that's like a full-time job. So many of you might be like, yeah, like that's on target for me. It very much feels like a full-time job for me. For others, it could be, yeah, that's not even touching the surface. It feels like 60 hours a week, or maybe it's not quite at 33 hours, but no matter where you fall on the spectrum, it's a lot of time, to become a caregiver. That and there's not a fairy godmother that sprinkles extra time for caregivers around the country. So you're trying to squeeze in all of these extra responsibilities and duties with already the stresses of daily life. So caregivers have this additional job as caring for their loved one with cancer. But what the survey also found out is that under 30% of those caregivers had told the medical team that they were struggling or that they had self-care needs. So despite knowing how challenging caregiving is, caregivers aren't always the best at speaking up and reaching out and saying, hey, I need some resources here, or this isn't really going great and I need some help. So, another thing I think that happens, and as an oncology social worker that I've kind of seen over time, is that medical institutions, cancer institutions specifically, don't always do the best job of getting resources out to caregivers. What I tend to find is a lot of those psychological and emotional and relationship resources are geared very much toward the patient and sometimes leaves out the caregiver. So, I think that that's changing, thankfully, partly because of the research that's being done, and we're realizing how important caregiver health is to people who are facing cancer. So hopefully in your center where your loved one is going, you can reach out maybe to a social worker, a nurse, a doctor, and say, hey, do you offer any resources or services to caregivers? Because I'm interested in, getting through this well, through the long haul. We also know too that sometimes the burdens of caregiving can become quite significant. And as an organization, the Alliance wants to provide services and resources to help people from getting to the place of burning out as a caregiver. The Colorectal Cancer Alliance did a recent Never Too Young survey report. And they found some pretty staggering statistics once they looked at close to 500 caregivers that were caring for people under 50 with colorectal cancer. 67% of those caregivers said that they were concerned about their mental health. And more specifically, 73 said they needed help with their anxiety and panic. 68 said they needed help with their depression, and 66% said that they found themselves withdrawing from their loved ones, from their families, from their friends. So again, this is why we just think this topic is very important, and we want you to know that it's okay to stand up for your needs as well. So we're going to dig in a little bit to try to give you some tools to help you do that. Our goals tonight, number one, is to just give you some general information about caregiving and about self-care. We also hope that you come away knowing that you're not alone. Like Lindsay and Brian said, one of their main goals of being here tonight is just to send the message that you're not alone in this, and there are other people who are facing this, and it's okay to need help and to reach out for help. So we all hope that you come away from this session just feeling those virtual hugs and that community that is available to you. You might also get some tips and tricks from Lindsay and Brian, some things that have worked for them that you might feel inspired to try to incorporate in your own life. Or it might spur you on to be creative, to think about things that you want to do to increase and grow in your self-care. And lastly, we'll finish with some resources to make sure that you know where to go after tonight to find additional information about caregiving. So Lindsay, could you start by telling us a little bit about what self-care has meant to you?
Sure. Self-care has meant to me is allowing myself to carve out time for myself during like the week or during a specific day. Uh, as we all know, being a caregiver is one of the hardest things like we'll ever have to experience. And it definitely takes a toll on my emotions daily. So finding time to do something for myself and do something I truly enjoy not only makes me a better mom to our 2-year-old, but also makes me a better caregiver to my husband. And the main thing that I like to try and do is exercise. And since I have a rambunctious 2-year-old who just never ever sits still for a minute of the day, he enjoys going out on bike rides with me. So we have biked around our neighborhood. I have a trailer that he sits in the back and he likes to look at the pumpkins right now since we're in fall. Or sometimes I'll take him to, there's like a park near our house that I drive to, and they have like standing trains for like kids to be able to like walk up on and just kind of look at them. And that's one of the things he truly obsesses about. So he really like doesn't argue with me when I'm like, let's go see the choo-choo. So while he's enjoying himself, I get to, enjoy doing some things for myself and get out in nature and just kind of, take a few deep breaths and burn off that extra energy I have. And then I also try to take daily walks with him, just get him out of the house, get him out in the neighborhood, seeing other people. And now with COVID, it's hard for, to go to like public places. So we need to get him like interacting with other children as much as possible. It's a big part in his developmental life. And then I'm also a very like hands-on crafty person. So like in the evenings after my son goes to bed or my husband's just kind of relaxing, I've been crocheting since I was a little girl. So I crochet hats now. I make Afghan blankets. It's just something that I can sit and do with my hands while just kind of watching some television, and it helps my brain so I don't start fixating on my husband's cancer and what's the next steps or what's going to happen. Like it's to me, that's very helpful. And I know there's a lot of YouTube videos out there, if anyone's like interested in crocheting, that are really easy for beginners to learn. Maybe you like to do stuff with your hands. So like to me, that's a really great option. And then I also like to, when I can have time, is just hang out with friends who I can just vent to about, what's going on in our lives. And Paul's cancer, which I'm sure sometimes gets really frustrating to listen, but I have friends out there that no matter how many times I express the same fear, they are always willing to listen and, try and give me the best advice as possible, even though they aren't, in the situation, which is kind of hard to relate with, but, they try their best, which is, very nice. And then the one thing I have learned through all this self-care is not being afraid to ask for help. Typically, I would say I'm a person who wants to do everything myself and usually doesn't want, someone else to put the burden on their shoulders. So usually if someone would come up to me and say, I know your husband's going through cancer, is there anything I can do? Like typically I'd say, no, I'm fine, thank you. I really appreciate you asking. But I've learned that through all of this, that I need to just say, yes, I do need help. I need the extra hands to either help cook or, take our son for like outside for a little bit. We have a neighbor who has been amazing next door, and he just said, I'm going to mow your grass for you guys this summer. I know you guys are going through a lot. I just want to do this for you guys. And, typically, like I said, I'd be, no, I'll get out there, I'll mow, like I'll figure out, I can carve a time out in the day. But he's just been, amazing, and just goes out there without even asking if we need our grass mow. He just does it for us, which has been so incredibly helpful, even though it's like such a simple task. and then since Paul has been on this new regimen of chemo, his skin is super sensitive. So, he can't even barely go outside without his skin like getting fried from the sun, which is hard. So that's, so him mowing the grass or doing anything outside for us always, it's very helpful. And then I have many other neighbors who always ask if they can help. So I'm just trying to say yes, even though I want to say no. And one of the last things that like I find extremely helpful is, a therapist, someone that is not so close to the situation, someone that can give me advice without emotions involved, just let me vent when I need to. And a really great friend of mine just gave me this really awesome like workbook that like it tells you, it like asks you questions like what are the like what are your dreams in the future, and like what is something that puts a smile on your face when you think about it. And I think that is helpful in like assessing, where I am and like trying to work out some of the really like hard feelings I have. So, those are just kind of the few things that I try to do for myself.
Just a few things. You are like doing incredible. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm excited to come back to that. How about you, Brian? What has self-care meant to you?
Well, I've always been a hard worker, worked a lot of hours, been involved with networking on different boards and so forth. So there was a lot of time away from home, throughout my career. So as soon as the diagnosis hit, my main stress was how am I going to take care of Jennifer, now that she needs care, round the clock care. And so for me, self-care was trying to get rid of as much in my life and in my schedule that was not a priority, but that didn't have to be done, so that I could refocus. And so, I reprioritized everything. I resigned from boards. I stopped going to networking groups. Talk to family, friends, coworkers, set expectations, time expectations, let them know what I was going through and what I needed. I needed flexibility. And that was really the key for taking care of me, was building the flexibility into my life so that I felt like I had the time and the ability to take care of Jennifer the way she needed it. So, I tell you, I think I was more stressed when I was out of the house. I know Lindsay talked about, exercising and doing things and on her own and so forth to get away from the situation and to recharge. But it's interesting. I don't know if it's a guy thing or not, but for me, it was more stressful leaving the situation and leaving the house. So for me, it was building in flexibility, communicating with everybody, work, friends, family, what to expect from me and when they were going to see me and the time I had to spend with them. When I was in the office, I had to get in, do my work and get home. Nothing that didn't have to be focused on. Having outlets at home. Having said that, being home was important to me, but of course, all of us need something to get our mind off the situation. So, for me, I kind of delved into research. I was reading, I was finding everything I could about cancer, about treatments, about studies, about anything having to do with that could help Jennifer's situation. It made me feel better, learning as much as I could about the situation so that I could help. I know Lindsay suggested asking for help, and I think that's important. I had a lot of people in my world saying, hey, how can we help? We want to help. We want to do something. What do you need? And at the time, initially, it's like, I don't know what I need. I don't know how you can help. I have no idea. This is, it's just, day to day. I'm doing what I have to do. I don't know what could help me in this situation. So, over time, I got better at accepting help. I thought of ways that people could help. And I think it's hard, but you have to be able to ask for help and then be more specific, because everyone wants to help, but they have no idea what you're going through. They they don't know what your world is like. And so they really need you to tell them what do you need, what would be helpful. So being able to do that's important. Lastly, you've got to have people that you feel comfortable talking to. You have to have a few close confidants that you can be open and honest with. And well, you have to be honest, obviously, with your spouse or the person you're caring for. It's a different type of honesty and opportunity. You have to be able to talk to somebody else. So choose those people early, ones you trust, and lean on them, you know, to the extent you can. I think that's important.
That's the same for both of you. It sounds like that those people that were willing to step up and be a part of your support system, you know, there came a time for both of you to say, okay, I'm going to lean on them. I'm going to be willing to say, yeah, I really do need help here. I really liked what you said, Brian, about the fact that you had a little bit of a learning curve as a caregiver, that you didn't know how to do this, you know, right from the beginning. No one does. But over time, you do learn what could be more helpful. And then it's taking that next step to say, yeah, I'm going to say yes the next time someone asks me if there's something that they can do to help me, because there really are these little things, or maybe big things, that could make a difference for me and my loved one. Really appreciate both of your honesty, your vulnerability. And I also think that both of your perspectives, I hope, is sharing with the audience that there's no right way to do self-care, that what self-care looks like for Lindsay is not the same as it looks like for Brian, and that's totally okay. A lot of times you have to kind of try on different methods of self-care and find out which ones work best for you. So both Lindsay and Brian touched on the fact that there are many different kind of like areas of self-care: physical, like that exercise, or maybe even the crocheting. They both talked about the social aspect of self-care, having people that they trust, that they can talk to, that they can vent to, who are kind of the ones that they could ask advice from. Those could be different people, right? They talked about, you know, the cognitive ways of self-care, prioritizing, of finding distractions, of being flexible, of you know, kind of really drilling down to what was most important to them and carving out and protecting the space that they needed for self-care, and how doing that kind of freed them up to focus on the things that was most important to them. And then, you know, that psychological piece, that emotional piece, possibly a mental health therapist. Maybe it's a phone call to one of the patient navigators at the Alliance, or a buddy, or maybe it's journaling, right? So there's all these areas that we can grow into and get stronger in. I think too that those can change over time. So like what you might find really helpful at initial diagnosis. So if any of you are within the first 3 months of your loved one being diagnosed with cancer, like you should pat yourself on the back if you're just getting sleep at night and eating all your meals and drinking water still, right? That's self-care. And then as things settle in, or you kind of understand a little bit more about this routine that cancer kind of throws at you, you may then have more time or energy or space to change up self-care in ways that now fits your new needs. You know, when you think about these different arenas of self-care, maybe one of them is really strong for you. Like some of you might find that I got exercise. Like I've always been a walker, right? Like every night I'm really good at walking outside or getting on my treadmill, or maybe one of you have consistently always been good at doing your devotionals or checking in on your spiritual self-care. Could you think about choosing an area where you may not do a lot of self-care in, and could you think about adding to that so that eventually you have different methods of self-care that touch on your physical well-being, spiritual well-being, social, cognitive, psychological. And that might be a fun way for you to get creative and think about areas that you want to grow in. Okay, but let's get real a little bit. Brian, what's gotten in the way for you when it comes to trying to carve out self-care?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's a sense of responsibility to everybody. in my life, and trying to balance, how do I meet everybody's needs. And while you're trying to do that, you kind of forget about your own needs. It's I mean, it's a good distraction in one sense, because you've got to focus, and so you don't have time to think about how you're feeling. But at the same time, it does stand in the way of self-care while you're worrying about everybody else and how they perceive you and so forth, and who are you letting down, and who are you not communicating with, and who did you not call and update, about the status, and so forth, because everybody's there, and everyone wants to be involved, and everyone wants to support you, but doing that is staying in touch with everybody, and doing that is also time consuming, and it kind of gets in the way of taking care of yourself a little bit. There's also some guilt, in that you shouldn't be important, in this situation. Um, it's all about the person you're taking care of, and then it's yeah it's interesting. You're obviously going to go through emotions yourself, and you're going to feel them, but you almost feel like, well, yeah, I may be feeling bad, I may be depressed, I may be a lot of things, I might be missing out on one thing or another. Maybe there's hobbies, interests that you put aside, because you just can't do it anymore. But then you think, well, geez, how can I possibly be feeling bad or feeling about myself in a time like this? So so for me, it was just it was okay. I guess it's a sort of a mercy that I don't miss all the hobbies and sort of the interests that I used to do. We found a new groove, and we're happy together. We at this stage, we're working out together again. So it's more about, I guess for me, the self-care is really feeling like I'm adequately caring for Jennifer, and that she's good, she's happy, she's doing okay, her emotional state is good, and if that's good, then I'm good. Yeah.
You celebrate when they celebrate, you're sad when they're sad, and your emotions as caregivers often align very closely with that of your loved ones. That's a really good point, for sure. It sounds like caregiving for you has really kind of distilled down what's most important to you.
Yeah.
And a lot of that fluff of life, you don't miss as much because you've decided for you that's not as important as maybe what it used to be.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's like a form of adaptability as caregivers, like being open to making those changes in our lives when we get thrown a curveball like cancer. Okay, Lindsay, how about you? What's gotten in the way of self-care for you?
So like Brian said, guilt is definitely something that has gotten in the way for me with self-care, and also just time in general. My son, Grayson, obviously can't take care of himself, and I mentioned him a couple of times now. He's only 2. And so, like, for instance, Paul, when he had to stay in his long hospital stays from his heart failure, or he was in the hospital for 10 days during his resection, it was hard for me leaving Grayson during the day with his grandparents to take care of him, because I felt guilty that I was not the one there taking care of him. But then, I would be at the hospital with Paul trying to help him out. And Paul and I decided from the beginning that we didn't want to ruin Grayson's routine. So every evening I would have to leave Paul, which I would feel guilty about leaving him to go home, and making sure my son, got his bath and, got his typical routine down, because for us that have had children, no routine is best for them. So we wanted to make sure he felt a sense of normalcy and wasn't getting affected by what's going on with Paul. And then it was just like a mental health battle in my brain, just going back and forth, like, who do I need to be with? Who needs me the most? And, I would say that was very, very hard. And I felt lots of guilt during that time. And even now we're in Houston, our son is back home in Columbus. We're here for, scans and all that, but I feel guilty that, I'm not with our son. So I would say that's a big barrier for me. And the other thing is, Brian also mentioned, was the guilt of like, why am I not the one going through this? Why does it have to be, our spouse? Like, just the guilt that you feel that you're healthy and, you're watching your spouse or your sister or your brother or whoever you're caring for, not only be in physical pain, but, emotional pain, just day in and day out of just feeling awful, especially when they're on chemo. Like chemo, I think for us has been just difficult with the fact the side effects have been just so hard on his body. And then, as far as balancing time, like again, like when our son was 8 months old, I remember my husband was, he was getting sick, and then my son was screaming, and I was standing there, and I looked at Paul, and I was like, I don't know who to go to. Like, you want me to go get Grayson, or do you need my help? Like, there's never enough time to get like everything done, and you just like, you can't split yourself in half, unfortunately. Like, so it's just, it's mentally, like I said, just difficult. And then I would say, another thing is, when you usually get typically calls from family members or whatever, they always ask, how's Paul doing? How's he feeling? Sometimes it's hard when, you need to kind of be asked, like, how are you holding up? Like, as a caregiver, like, what's going on with you? And I know that can sound a bit selfish sometimes saying that, but because especially I'm not the one, obviously, with the cancer and not, suffering physically from it all. But, I would say the emotional side, like, definitely takes a toll on us caregivers. I don't just worry about Paul, but I worry about like the effects it is having on his body, and the surgeries and the pain, and then I worry about our son and his emotional state with all this, because as everybody knows, scans can be very anxious. Scan anxiety is what I think a lot of people call it. And I'm sure he can feel the tension in our house. And when I was talking about after Paul's reversal, like, he's had so many issues, using the restroom in the evening and spending most of his time there. And my son is now starting to like realize, like, Daddy's in the bathroom, like Daddy sounds like he's in pain, and he'll like ask me, Daddy okay? And that just it honestly just breaks my heart, just hearing that my son is starting to pick up on, Daddy's not feeling good, and trying to comfort him and all that kind of stuff. So I think, those things, time and guilt, is probably the main two things that really kind of get in my way.
I appreciate both of your honesty about the emotions, right? Like, I think sometimes with this conversation, we focus a lot on time constraints or maybe financial constraints, which are very real as well. Some caregivers don't have the flexibility in their jobs to be able to do what they want as a caregiver, or they can't afford, a gym membership, and their sidewalks are bumpy or they don't exist. So they don't really have a place to go and exercise. So some of those concrete barriers are very real when it comes to caregiving. But I love how you both role modeled the fact that a lot of times for caregivers, it's the emotional aspect that keeps you from choosing self-care, the guilt, the feelings of selfishness, and somehow believing the myth that if you take care of yourself, it means you're not loving fully or giving fully to your loved one. And so thank you for just being open and honest about this. Is a reality of what it feels like sometimes to see someone you dearly love face something so treacherous and big and scary, and feeling lost in that as a caregiver a lot of times. So Lindsay, what's helped you overcome some of those barriers?
Let's see. What has helped us overcome some of our barriers is I'm a person who likes being in control. And as we know with cancer, we can't control what's happening with cancer. What is it doing? Is it reacting to the chemo correctly? All that kind of stuff. So throughout all this, I've had a lot of anxiety and a lot of frustration with Paul's treatments, with his surgeries, with his appointments, just all of that. And so my thing is I try to kind of put all that in the back of my head until the appointment is that day or the night before. I try not to fixate on, is the chemo working, or, is, everything going how it's supposed to, until I have to actually face what's going on. And when I get those bad thoughts in my mind, I try to think of them as like a little cloud that, put the mind in the cloud and just let it just kind of float away until I need to bring it into the forefront and really face what's going on. And then the other thing is I have met some incredible people on the Blue Hope Nation Facebook page. There's actually 3 other girls, Sarah, Maggie, and Megan, who I have connected with. It all started, I saw Sarah write a message on the page that was like talking about her husband's situation, and she mentioned that her husband had also had heart issues during Xylota. So I was like, oh my gosh, like our doctor told us there's only like 1% to 2% chance that'll happen. So I would love to just talk to someone else whose husband also has experienced that. And so we were able to connect on that level, and I private messaged her. And she said that she knew of another girl who husband, similar situation to ours, younger, in their 30s, early 40s. And she's like, that would be a really great person for you to reach out to as well and see like what their treatment plan is. Her name's Maggie. Her husband is actually NED right now, which is fantastic. So I reached out to her, and we kind of started a group chat with the 3 of us. And Maggie also, she knew a girl named Megan, who, again, her husband, young in his 30s, stage 4, spreads the lungs, all that kind of stuff. He had a huge 2 open lung surgeries recently. So, and that's the path that we're going down. So, being able to ask them all sorts of questions about like what their husbands had experienced and what they would do and all that kind of stuff was it was amazing. And all of us, we chat all day, every day, just talking about, our days and our husbands and where our next step is. And, obviously praying for each other all the time and just being like a good, like source to lean on, when you're having those really tough days, and knowing that there is like other people out there that know exactly how you feel. It's hard when, you're talking to a friend who has never been through this. They don't really know exactly the fears and, the anxiety and the depression and the ups and the downs. And, every day is so different than the next day. And, that's just been something that I've really relied on now. And, if you see someone post something, don't be afraid to ask questions, or don't be afraid to reach out to them. And, I know we mentioned a little earlier about like our local hospitals where we get treated at, there's like good resources there that, aren't all the time, mentioned. But if you call, like, I know where we are at the Janes, they have just different like services, not only for the patients, but they also have them for us as caregivers, like drawing classes or yoga classes or meditation classes, just all that kind of stuff, just to help the caregivers, get through their daily lives as well. So those are a few of the things.
Awesome tips. Those are great tips. And Brian, how have you overcome some of those barriers that we talked about earlier for self-care?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let me share some of those. I think honest, open communication, with Jennifer and with those few friends that I chose to confide in, I think was huge, being able to do that. Also, I mean, the patient, Jennifer, and rightfully so, goes through a lot of emotions. There's anger, there's depression, there's lashing out, there's all sorts of emotions, and you're there as a caregiver, and you're sort of the sponge, and you're sort of absorbing all of it and trying to help. And so I think one of the things that you need to try to do is when you're absorbing this emotion, sometimes it's negative, sometimes it's positive, but when you're absorbing it, you need to be able to take short breaks, and sort of get rid of it, offload it, and then go back, because naturally, you know, things are going to be said, situations are going to come up that maybe you don't feel is fair, or it's being taken out on the caregiver. The one being cared for is taking stuff out on the caregiver. So you have to be able to recognize that, not take it personally to the extent you can. Take a short break and come back with a good attitude and continue to take care of that person the way they need to, and accept them, you know, for whatever they're going through. They're entitled, you know, they're entitled to feel that. And also, I mean, on another note, what really helped me again was the research. You really have to be your best advocate, your own best advocate. I mean, I can't tell you how many doctors that we've come across in the last 3 years. And I'm sure they're all wonderful doctors, but they all have different styles, different opinions. And every doctor's opinion is not right for you. It doesn't work for you. And so I would just advise everyone, if you don't feel comfortable with the advice you're getting or the plan that's being presented, do your own research, get second, third opinions. Don't just accept everything at face value. It's helped us tremendously. I mean, our original surgeon said that her colostomy could never be reversed because the tumor was so low that he couldn't do it, and nobody could do it, and that it was a permanent thing, and that she should find a psychiatrist to cope with that new reality and the fact that she was going to have a colostomy the rest of her life. We didn't accept that. We went to 5 different surgeons in the area, found one that was very positive, felt like he could do it, and he did. And so today she doesn't have the colostomy. We've had other doctors, you know, give her 11% chance of survival, or give her 5 years, or tell her that if she didn't get a port and go on the heavy chemo, that she wouldn't be around very long, that she was gonna die, and she wasn't being wise not doing that. So we've heard a lot of things from a lot of different doctors. We've changed oncologists a number of times, and I think it's not because they're bad doctors. It's just their opinion based on their experience, and it's fine. But it may or may not be accurate. So be your best advocate, do the research, talk to people, get second and third opinions. This is your life that you're dealing with. So be certain. And I think being certain and taking a proactive role in your own care helps you become more confident. It gives you hope, makes you feel like there's going to be a good outcome, you know, because you're in control to the extent you can. So, you know, do that, be wise about the choices that you make for your health. And the doctors, don't be afraid to find another doctor if you're just not clicking. It's important that you mesh and that you feel comfortable with your doctor. One of the places I looked, I found some really great research. I know this is a little off topic, but I wanted to throw this in, is Health Sciences Institute, hsionline.com. Really great resource for cancer research and so forth. So I found that helpful. A lot of the supplements I found there, along with the studies and the background on these various supplements. So that's pretty cool. And then, you know, what also helped was Jen reaching out and finding CCA. I mean, we haven't mentioned CCA enough on this call. You guys are incredible. What an incredible organization, and help and support and knowledge. And I mean, it's been having CCA involved with our lives the last 3 years has been just a blessing. We probably wouldn't be here like we are today had we not been involved with this group. And then Joy Bus, there's a local nonprofit that delivered food once a week on Fridays, and the folks that were delivering food were cancer survivors for the most part. And so I may have, you know, I was at work or I might have to be out of the house or whatnot. I knew there was someone coming by with a meal and that would sit and they would just talk to Jen for, an hour, 2 hours. I mean, there was no time limit, and it was really a great outlet for Jen. So she wasn't just talking to me all the time, and she had other adult, interaction with someone who had actually gone through it, and as much as caregivers, as much as we try to understand, we don't really understand unless we've gone through it ourselves. So, I mean, we do our best, right? But having a different perspective of someone who's gone through it, both from CCA and others, in our case, Joy Bus, the person coming by with a meal, was really helpful. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's what I wanted to throw out. But I hope some of this information's been helpful. Hope it touches somebody out there, and I hope our information will be put out there so that others can reach out to us after this webinar with any questions that they didn't ask during. And I don't know about, I can't speak for Lindsay, but I'm happy to be a resource and put my my phone number out there for anyone who wants to talk. Anyone I can help. So
yeah,
thanks for letting me be part of this today.
Yeah, I agree. I'm more than willing to talk to anyone about, what we've gone through. And just to bring up what Brian said, we also, after our doctor originally told us Paul Lee had 3 years, we set out to find a different doctor. They also told us up in Columbus that they could not reach a certain spot in his lung. And, we ended up coming down to MD, and they're like, no, we can go in there and we're going to try and get it out. So just because a surgeon, like he said, or a doctor doesn't, exactly do what you think is best, like there's no reason why you can't go and try and find someone who, is willing to at least try, or is willing to try the path that you would like to go down. We even spoke with actually Sloan Kettering too, before we ended up sticking with MD Anderson. So there's definitely other people out there that are, different doctors, different opinions, different research, different this, different that, you can always try.
We have a great question from the audience. You mentioned being willing to kind of be available for other caregivers. Are both of you a part of Blue Hope Nation?
Yes.
Okay, so they can search you in Blue Hope Nation, and I think Stephen might be able to put your names into the Facebook Live so that they can search, or the Alliance may have other ways to make sure that our listeners tonight have a way to get a hold of you. So yes, resources are absolutely available through the Alliance. Thank you so much for bringing up Blue Hope Nation. Don't forget, also there's a helpline with patient navigators who are ready and willing to listen and to provide support and remind you that you're not alone. There is a support and financial resource guide that has local and even national resources. So Brian and Lindsay have both looked into what's available in their local areas. If you're not sure what might be available where you live, open up that support and financial resource guide and look for your state, and you may be able to find some places that you didn't know existed. Also asking your local oncology team, about local resources. They're usually really good at being able to tell you what's available. The support and financial resource guide that the Alliance also has a section dedicated specifically on caregiving. So if this topic was of significant interest to you and you want to know more, I do encourage you to take a look at that. The CCA website is available 24 hours a day. So, they know that sometimes it's the middle of the night where you feel like, okay, I'm ready to reach out or I need to connect. Blue Hope Nation is there. The website is there. I want to go back quickly, Brian, to that analogy that you used of a sponge, because I think that that's really interesting when it comes to self-care. So you're talking about all the things that come at you as a caregiver, the fear, the anxiety, the worry, the emotions of your loved one, the responsibilities. And yes, as a sponge, you really do kind of just expand and get bigger and bigger, and it almost feels like it's just too much. Self-care is the wringing out. Self-care is the way that you release and you let go of some of those things so that you can actually be a sponge again and do the job of being a caregiver. I don't think any of you would be listening tonight if, you know, if it wasn't important to you to be able to continue to be the caregiver that you want to be. And if you, as sponges, you won't be able to continue to be a caregiver in the way that's most important to you if you don't find the ways that you can wring out and create space for yourself to continue to be in that role. So thank you very much, Brian, for bringing up that analogy. I think that was really spot on. It sounds like for both of you too, it's just the mindset. You have to give yourself permission. You know, like one of the biggest hurdles in this whole thing is really in our minds of just saying, I want to do the best I can as a caregiver. And I know that in order to do that, I have to be willing to take care of myself. So it's neat to see that over, you know, several years that you both have been in this role of caregiving, that you've been on that kind of roller coaster of sometimes feeling really good about where you're at and sometimes not. But that's being okay and being part of it and just continuing to grow through the process and be willing to continue to look at ways that you can improve or take better care of yourself. So anything, Lindsay or Brian, that you want to add?
The last thing is at CCA, I talked to Jeannie before she retired, and she was such an incredible source to, you know, get any information, so knowledgeable. And I know she's currently retired, but there are many others, you know, that are there that you can reach out to and can help give you advice. And, you know, she was there whenever I had like a simple question of my husband's CEA rose, like, should I freak out? And she'd be like, no, don't worry. It happens. Like, don't like look into it too much. Just having that reassurance and someone there that is willing to listen and help you. It's been fantastic.
Awesome. Yeah. We have a good question too. I wondered if you both could maybe comment on this, especially since you both have been caregiving for a couple years. How has COVID changed your your role as a caregiver?
Oh wow. So, well, being very careful, probably careful than most when I leave the house and who I'm around and what type of social gatherings I put myself in. You know, mask up, wash hands, the whole thing, because I don't want to bring it back to Jennifer. I mean, I know her, you know, her lungs in particular are vulnerable. Her immune system is vulnerable. And so I'm sure Lindsay feels the same way. You do not want to bring that home. So yeah, it's a whole another level of stress when it comes to COVID-19. You know, only thinking about yourself. And I know, I mean, everybody has family. Everyone thinks about their family and so forth. I'm not saying that, but having someone who has a precondition, you know, a pre-existing condition like that, where they're more susceptible to COVID, it's just another level of concern when you're dealing with COVID and how you go about living your life these days. You know, from going grocery shopping to getting gas to, I mean, everything you do, it's top of mind.
Oh, I definitely agree. You know, Paul, unfortunately, the only time he left the house since March is to go to doctor's appointments or us getting on a plane to come down to Houston. So it's definitely changed a lot in that aspect. And he's very lucky that his job is still working from home. He doesn't have to go in the office every day. And he's been working actually the entire time during his entire treatment, which I give him so much props for that because he's had some pretty bad days. But I would have to say the one blessing for COVID is that I've had all this extra time that I've had to spend with my husband every single day, and I wouldn't be able to see him if he was at the office. So I love having him home, and I love being able just to go upstairs and be like, hey, how are you doing? Everything okay? You know, that type of thing. So, you know, COVID stinks. It stinks for everyone, but it especially stinks for people who are going through cancer because like Brian said, you don't want to bring that home to your caregiver, to the person you're caring for, because you just don't know how they would react to it, especially being on chemo. You know, your immune system can drop dramatically during that time. So, you know, but like I said, the one positive thing I can say is the extra time I've had to spend with my husband and my son being able to spend time with him. We're going to be very sad when he has to go back one day to work.
For sure. Well, it sounds like COVID has kind of heightened a lot of that anxiety and that just awareness of some of the things that you may have already been worrying about as a caregiver, but at the same time, as cancer has taught you, where can we continue to find our joy and find our meaning, and how can I continue to stay connected to the things that are most important to me? So this has been an incredible session. Thank you so much, Lindsay and Brian, for your honesty and for your willingness to spend time to share your stories with the Alliance community, and your willingness to continue this conversation in Blue Hope Nation. Stay tuned for other Facebook Live events from the Colorectal Cancer Alliance, as they do a great job of responding to the needs of their community, which range from, treatment, upcoming treatments, and psychological things that you might be, wondering about, or ways to get support, conversations about caregiving. It really runs the gamut. They do an excellent job of just continuing to put out content that matters the most to you. So again, thanks for tuning in, and have a great evening.
Thanks, Danielle. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you.